Have you ever wanted to write your own Dungeons & Dragons adventure but don't know where to get started? Well, you're in the right spot. In this video series, I'm going to be discussing with you how to write your very own D&D adventures. Topics will span from the very birth of an adventure to writing large story arcs, designing puzzles and encounters, all the way to execution and actually running your campaign. Now, this series is designed for people and DMs of every skill level, from beginners who haven't the slightest idea of where to start, to experts who've been running and playing since the AD&D days. Throughout this series, I'll be writing a module alongside you guys that I will actually use for a future adventure. If you guys have any comments, ideas, or suggestions to what I'm writing for this example adventure, please leave them in the comments below. Welcome back to Mastering the Dungeon, the series in which I break down how to write and run your very own D&D adventure. Now, previously, we talked about inspiration and brainstorming and gave an example about a secret rocket project being built for the players to explore. We then brainstormed a bunch of ideas onto the page just to get a feeling of what you could potentially do or what could potentially happen during an adventure. Remember, we're trying to keep things big at this point in time. Do not bog yourselves down with maps or items or characters or NPCs or even encounters at this point in time. To be successful, we need to think big picture. The next step in our video series is to talk about the bad guys and their motivations and desires. It's important to define early in the writing process so that you can more easily come up with encounters for the players that relate to the plot and so that these encounters can feel connected. For example, let's say I was writing about that evil mummy lord we talked about last time, and I don't have any reason the mummy lord's attacking the town. So when I start to write smaller encounters, I don't have any direction, and no matter what I pick, it feels disjointed. Let's say the first encounter is a fight in the town square with some minor mummy minions. Sure, the players will naturally attack the mummies as they're kind of bad guys, but after the fight, if there was no reason for the mummies to be there, it'll feel like a random encounter and the entire thing was pointless. Remember, players are naturally curious about the story and the world that you're painting for them, and you need to be able to answer the question, why? Because they will ask. Either directly or subconsciously, they will ask. Let's say the players start questioning the shopkeepers after the fight. Why were the mummies in the town square? What were they doing there? Have you seen any other mummies in the area? If all your answers are, well, I don't know, the players will immediately feel disengaged. If you haven't thought about your main villain and their motivations, it makes answering these questions and writing about it very difficult. Now, let's say the Mummy Lord's motivation is he wants to be the ruler of the desert. To do that, he needs a huge army, and therefore he's sending his minions to kidnap townsfolk and to turn them into more mummy minions to build up his forces. Now we're cooking with something. Some of the questions that the players might ask, why were the mummies in the town square? Well, you got an answer. Well, they're pretty common nowadays. I've seen them running around for the past 4 months. Another common question the players could ask is, well, what were the mummies doing in the town square? Now you have an answer for that as well. The shopkeep can say, well, you know, I know that they kidnap people. We've had a lot of disappearances lately. Not really sure where they go. I kind of hide behind my desk until it's all over, but I heard that a mother had her daughter kidnapped from her just the other day, so try asking 2 shops down about it. I'm sure they have more information for you. Okay, now you're starting to build up a story for the players to want to explore through, and this was a super easy task to do when we figured out what the bad guy wants. Now we know the importance of having a motivation for the villain. Now all we need to know is how to pick one and how to pick their associated incentives. If you already have something in mind, great, run with it. However, if you're struggling to come up with something, there is a way to figure it out. I'm going to be using some lists and questions made by Bob WorldBuilder to help you think about who your villain is and what their motivations are. I would highly recommend checking out his channel as he has a lot of cool D&D content that is definitely worth watching. So, for the first villain selection, they're often paired with a thrall or a minion, and Bob has a great list to choose from if you need, or come up with something on your own. Use these kind of pairs as a reference to kind of get a feeling for what a big boss and kind of a minion should be like. You want to pick a bad guy that you find interesting or exciting, that you could see yourself writing about. Don't force yourself to write about something you hate. To come up with some villain motivations, ask yourself Bob's question. What do they need/want? What are the villain's desires and their needs, and how do they get there? For our Mummy Lord example, the Mummy Lord wants power. He wants to rule. And to do that, he needs an army or servants from the list. You can just roll in the table that Bob provides if you're really super stuck. However, I find that if you make a distinct selection about the bad guys, you'll find yourself more attached to your writing if it's your choice and your decision. Once you select your villain and motivations, you can then expand upon your first brainstorming session and start to fill in some of the details. Remember, we're still thinking broad strokes, so don't get hung up in any of the tiny details just yet. They'll come later. For our example adventure, last time we talked about the initial inspiration of the players investigating a white dragon, and they end up finding out it's a rocket. Well, for our villain group, I've selected a group of cultists trying to bring back an ancient one into the world. The main boss will be a cult leader mastermind of some kind. I feel like coordinating such a large rocket project in secret requires a lot of intelligence and planning, so I think I'm going to make him an intelligence spellcaster. So, now that we've selected our villain, we now need to select our villain motivation. We have our cult and our cult leader, and both of them want the same thing, to bring back the Chthonian god they've been praising for the last millennium or however many years into reality. And to do that, they need to sacrifice, let's say, 1,000 people at the same time. And how do they sacrifice 1,000 people at the same time? By blasting a rocket and exploding it on a big city. Maybe it takes this tons of soul energy to bring back such a powerful deity. With our villains and their motivations now selected, we can now start to think of the major storyboard points that we want to have in our tale, and now we can start to shape them towards this Chthonian summoning ritual that the cultists are ultimately trying to do upon the land. Some ideas that I had to go along with this big ritual specifically came from the Hallowed spell. The Hallowed spell is a 5th level evocation that allows an area that you choose to be infused with either holy or unholy power. What's cool about the Hallowed spell is there can be special effects inside of these hallowed areas. So for example, let's say there's a blessing on the church, or maybe including the church's graveyard, that essentially allows players not to be frightened because it's kind of a holy and a sacred place. However, you can flip that to kind of an evil hallowed area where you can take a graveyard where all undead start to regain hit points or something like that if they're under the effect. Important to note with the Hallowed spell is that the spell fails if the radius includes an area that is already in the effect of a Hallowed spell. So my idea is to take a little kind of custom homebrewed Hollow spell where they're essentially trying to cast it on a city instead of just one plot of land, because they want to be able to sacrifice 1,000 people at the same time with this large rocket, which kind of seals this Hallowed spell and makes it whole, I guess, at the end. However, because you can't have 2 Hallowed spells in the same place at once, their sub-goal at the beginning of the campaign is to remove all of the previous Hallowed spells. So for example, the Good Church, maybe there's a government building in the city that's also under the Hallowed spell. I can pepper the city with a couple of locations. So here's what I'm thinking for the main plot of my campaign. The story opens with the players in a town. They hear some reports of some blacksmiths, maybe artificers, maybe forge clerics, leaving the town or kind of disappearing for long periods of time because this cultist group has essentially employed them to work at their place to build this white dragon. Now, the players are thinking, oh, there's this spooky white dragon plot that's going on, and a bunch of the townsfolk can't talk about this white dragon because the cultists, they're magical, and maybe they've cast some sort of binding pact with these NPCs where they can't talk about the work they do, but maybe there's some clues that they can say and, kind of talk about it in third person, stuff like that. So that's kind of plot A, and that's the overarching plot of the players investigating why are all these people going to work at this company, what is this white dragon about, and there's this kind of fear that's stirred up in the town about the white dragon's going to be unleashed upon the town. Maybe midway towards the campaign, you see a flyer by the cultists put up saying, hey, you need to give us all your holy relics and trinkets, otherwise we're going to unleash our white dragon upon the land. And what that is a reference to is that they are trying to remove the hallowed spells from these holy sites. So those maybe magical trinkets, somebody's bones or arms or something like that, protects these hallowed areas, and the cultists want to get rid of them so that they can cast a huge hallowed spell to then enact their will. Speaking of the hallowed spell, that's going to be kind of a side plot for the characters to investigate as well, where halfway through the story, or maybe a quarter of the way through, they'll hear some other reports of, hey, can you help me out? The undead are kind of rising up. Someone's messing around with this hallowed sanctity place inside the church, the government building, whatever. Then, at the very end, these 2 story arcs will converge, where the players break into the bad guy base. They see this giant white rocket, and they figure out the bad guy's plans of, oh my god, they're gonna destroy the city with this huge hallowed spell and explosion from this rocket, and they are trying to summon some Chthonian god again. I kind of need to pick that out, but that's kind of the bare bones of what I'm thinking about for this kind of campaign story to go, and it was really easy for me to start to think about some smaller encounters and some story beats now that I have the motivations for the bad guys written. And that takes us to the end of part 2 of Mastering the Dungeon. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Be sure to check out next video, which is all about encounter writing and storyboarding your adventure. I feel like this is now the next natural step, now that we've defined what our inspiration for the campaign is, and who and what the bad guys are and what they're doing. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time.